So for those of you who are, I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet, I am Amy Myers Jaffe, and I am the director of our Energy Forum here at the Baker Institute. We have really had a great morning. I appreciate the staying power. Everybody is still here after lunch, so that's a sign of a good conference. I am going to make some brief remarks now just to give you an overview of how we see the findings for this study. I'm only going to speak very briefly because I feel that a lot of the highlights for the study are coming out in the individual presentation of the scholars who worked on it. It's very much a team project. Those of you who've taken the publications will see there's a list of 10 or 12 authors that contributed to this study. We are very pleased to be able to do these interdisciplinary studies, and I just wanted to thank again Institute for Energy Economics of Japan and Chevron for helping us conceptualize the research we did, and also providing the support for our graduate students and others who've worked on these papers. It really makes a big difference for us. It makes a huge contribution to the educational activities of young people at Rice to be able to participate in these studies. And some of them have gone back to class, but those of you who notice we a group of young people who are sitting in the back, a lot of them are our interns and graduate students, and I'm sure someday they'll all be working for companies around Houston. Several of our former students are here representing companies in Houston, so these grants we get to do these studies really make a big difference, not only in our learning and the public policy learning we hope we take to capitals like Washington and Beijing, but also for the educational experience here at Rice. So, that did not work. That's not good. Maybe he got this thing working. As Dr. Saligo mentioned this morning, the interesting thing about the scenarios that we ran on the number of cars that are going to come on the road in China, and then looking at what some of the scenarios might be for oil use, you can see in the scenario where the car standards that the Chinese have put in don't fully hit the road in the speed at which they've projected, and in a case where Chinese would, not have a car parked in the garage to show their neighbors that they have reached the middle class, but they're actually going to use them to go on holiday down to Hainan Island. China would, when we get into the 2030s, would crisscross the U.S. oil demand line. And in any case, I think we can assume that their oil use is going to be becoming increasingly similar to that of the United States. The green line, which we didn't show you, is the Chinese have announced an ambition to have 5 million electric cars a year on the road. I don't see that as a climate change policy necessarily, given the high proportion of electricity generated in China by coal, but it certainly could be an oil strategy. The interesting thing, I think, about this strategy, and I'm going to talk about the sort of what were our takeaways from this study, and I think it marries very nicely together with Dr. Steinfeld's talk this morning, is that there's this sort of belief system we have here in the United States from the media and other things that politicians have said, that in energy the Chinese are way ahead of us, and because they have state planning and a command economy, that they are going to be able to address this energy issue, and we're going to be left behind in the dust. And when we went and did this research, we were agnostic onto that subject. And Tom Friedman, in his last book, had a paragraph about how he wishes we could be China for one day, and the Central Command could come in and say, here's where we're raising taxes, here's what we're doing, and programs for renewable energy, and here's how many electric cars we're going to have. And he said it would be nice to, for 24 hours, be China. And our conclusion for this study, which I can sum up in one line, China isn't China. And I think if you read all these papers, and especially when you hear Dr. Lewis's presentation about the new Central Planning Commission that they've put in, the NEC in China, what you're going to find out is China's not China. China has a set of local and industry interests that come in and out of the Communist Party, in and out of policy making in China. I think their revolving door probably statistically is stronger than Washington's revolving door. And so therefore, implementing policy from this centralized agency whose job it is to propel renewable energy into that system and lower oil demand significantly, I think we're going to find that they're not going to be able to achieve that. And they're not going to be able to achieve it in several different ways. And even with this green line, it's a little misleading, because even having 5 million electric cars a year coming onto the road in China, given the high projection for the number of cars that will come onto the road in China over the next 20, 30 years, that's going to save them 800,000 barrels a day of oil, which is important, but it's not going to move the needle of having it be that when we get to, say, a 2040, they're not going to look like the United States and have the same problems we do. And when you look at some of their policies, right, and you compare it to where we are in the United States, because we're always so hard on ourselves, which we should be, about the fact that we don't have a comprehensive energy policy. China seems to have a comprehensive energy policy, but I think they'll have an increasingly difficult time to implement it. And the story that Al Troner made allusions to this morning in his talk, which I'll say a little more explicitly, is that there were these targets for energy intensity that came due in 2010, and some of the local governments hadn't quite met their target, and the central government was pressing people to meet their targets, and so the Chinese government basically cut off electricity supply to certain regions or entities so they could meet these targets. And so those entities didn't just shut down because they had no electricity. They went and bought diesel generators and went off-grid and generated the electricity, and therefore the demand for diesel fuel in China is probably greatly understated in official numbers for 2010. And it probably is a good reason why the oil price went up a lot in 2010. And so, again, it calls into question this idea that you could somehow mandate it there, and because it's China, you're mandating it, and because, President Obama is not willing to come on TV with a sweater like Jimmy Carter and tell all of you to turn your thermostat down, that somehow it's easier to do there, and I just don't really think that that's true. I think that what we've seen in conducting this research is that that's not likely to be true moving forward. And then I think the other interesting thing, and we've had some visiting scholars from China here over the past year, and we've had some think tank relationships where people have come and visited us, or we've gone to China and visit them. And I've asked people this question because when the going abroad policy, which is, China's NOCs are going to go and they're going to invest in countries and have equity oil. In other words, they're going to explore for oil, and when they find it, they'll own that oil and bring it home to China or sell it in the market as if they were bringing it home to China and have the financial benefit, that this was somehow going to bring them energy security. And I had these lectures that I did in China for like a decade, where I explained what happened to the French in 1979, which some of you probably remember, which is that they actually housed Ayatollah Khomeini. And then when he went back to Iran, the first thing he did was cut off the French, right? And it didn't help them at all. They hedged, and it didn't help them at all. The second they had the revolution in Iran, France got cut off from the oil like everybody else, right? And so this whole equity oil thing, in my view, as an American analyst, is really like pretty meaningless. And I think the Chinese learned that really quickly in Libya, right? Not that they had so much production there. I think that now their diplomats are flying around and struggling around in Sudan because, of course, now South Sudan, where 90% of their oil production is a totally different country and a totally different government. Their investments in Iran have come against the tangle of the international community's sanctions program. And then they're going to have the same political risk problems as everybody else in Iraq in terms of on-the-ground difficulty in getting, materials in, getting permits approved, getting those projects moving, having the water for water handling and so forth. They're going to have those same problems as everybody else. And they are going to have, in my opinion, increasing problems in Venezuela. post-Chavez. So this going abroad concept, now they're, as I joke with people, now they're in the real world with everybody else. They've had to evacuate their personnel from an Arab country going through turmoil. I'm hoping that won't have to happen again, but it is likely to happen again, right? And so when you look at that, that policy, it's interesting, like, will they assess that policy not being providing as much stability as they hoped by realizing that they're moving to be a status quo power and therefore diplomatic collaboration and coordination with the international community and specifically the United States might be a positive thing? Or will people take the opposite message from that, which some analysts in China have suggested to me, where you have hardliners in the military who would like to expend even more money on naval ability and capability and so forth, and the sort of risks to their going abroad program could be used as yet another momentum for that program. So we're really, I think, in China at a bit of a crossroads, and now maybe the challenges and the extent of the challenges are going to, I think, be much more transparent inside decision-making there. Like they're in the world with the rest of us now. They have to worry about inflation affecting their economy when the price of oil goes up. They have to worry about the safety of their personnel in places where they're investing to do oil and gas. They had this interesting epiphany, which I think is in my next slide, that maybe they should be doing more investments in the United States and Canada because those are investments that they don't have to worry about the political risk of. I mean, the other interesting thing, which I was talking about again at my table at lunch, is that, Tom Friedman, with all due respect to Tom Friedman, we have a free market system here. There were U.S. independents that took that technology that was put on the shelf by the DOE, back from the days when we were all thinking about shale in the 70s, right? And George Mitchell commercialized that technology, and you've all heard Ken's presentation about what that shale could mean for the United States. And we're not going to need to import LNG. We're talking about being a natural gas exporter. The cost of electricity in the United States is coming down and likely to continue to be coming down. And, I heard one analyst speak this week where they were suggesting that the irony might be that if the Asian market stays on the oil-linked price for natural gas and we have a hub here, that we might have something where industry would return to the United States because of the cheap industrial fuel costs, whereas China might be uncompetitive because of their high fuel costs, right? So there are a lot of different things that have come about because we have free market innovation in oil and gas, right? So if you put that together with the fact that maybe there's not so much free market innovation even in clean tech in China, but we're having a tremendous amount of innovation in oil and gas here in the United States, so much so that China is coming to invest $1 billion here in oil and gas because they want to tap into that technological innovation. Then when you start to think about the comparison between how many billions of dollars they're spending to be the demonstration project country geography and what we're actually achieving through having an open market system which has brought innovation in oil and gas, which I do think eventually will spill over into renewable energy. Maybe we're not in as bad a place as we think, and maybe we need to understand that some of these opportunities are creating opportunities for the United States. For example, when CNOOC wanted to buy into the billion-dollar shale properties here in the United States, the Obama administration leveraged that to get them to vote in a different way on China-Iran sanctions policy issues. And so there are some opportunities that were created. The interesting thing is that the United States and China were both large energy consumers, as we've shown you from our projections. China's energy use is going to look much closer to the United States in the future, in the next 2 decades, than it is going to look less dissimilar. It's going to look more and more similar. And so the question is, we could gain something from, not pitching this or viewing this, and they could gain something and not pitching this and viewing this as a zero sum, right? This is not like our policies in Europe versus Russia's policies in Europe, right? There's no zero sum here in the sense that both countries have the same strategic interests in terms of the energy issue. And so the question is, will we get there? And our last session today, for those of you with real rigor who can stay to the very last speaker, our last session will be talking about this sort of what I call the conflict between American exceptionalism. And for those of you not in international relations, that's, we are the superpower of the world, and will always be that, and we must, maintain our Bush doctrine. We need to maintain our preeminent superpower status with China's sense of national destiny. This is a country, as we've heard the superlatives, this is a country that's achieved amazing economic growth, that's lifted a population into the industrial society in a miraculously short amount of time, with less social destabilization and social change, having less negative ramifications on the society than maybe other parts of the world that have tried to do the same thing. So I think that there's the challenge, and that's why we're going to end the conference with a sort of a counterpoint discussion about that, because it's going to matter for energy markets for sure how the United States and China views that puzzle. I told a group who was visiting us, if the United States and China, at a time of a critical OPEC meeting, were to stand up and have our president and their president, or our, I guess, vice president and their vice president, stand up and make a joint announcement that China and the United States are concerned about the rising price of oil, and we're both announcing our joint policies on, transportation fuels, right? The impact of having both China and the United States having a press conference the same day or the day after OPEC, I think would have an instantaneous psychological impact on the markets, right? And we don't leverage that opportunity. We don't leverage that opportunity, even though it's so clearly in the strategic interest of both countries to make joint statements on oil supply and oil pricing and so forth. So I sort of leave us all leaving the conference with this sort of open idea to think about, how the next 10 years progresses, understanding that the dialogue with China should not be one of a country, we, America, that cannot get its energy act together with a country, China, that has its energy act together, but actually of two countries that have the exact same problems. We can't move the needle on our car use. They are having trouble moving the needle on their car use, right? We have found that having our companies go abroad and invest abroad can't 100% bring energy security because there's above ground risk that no one can control, right? So it's the same. And there is no being China for one day, not for China, not for us, right? It's a complex problem, involves a lot of moving pieces, a lot of things that are hard to control, and a lot of technological innovation. And when it comes to technological innovation, I just think that our industry is still really ahead of the curve that way. And we need to leverage that and take advantage of that and not, see that as a negative. So anyway, with that, I'm going to invite our next panel up for the next session. The next session is going to be about some of the more political aspects of the energy question. And let me get forgot my sheet with everybody's on. So, like the last panel, I'm not going to read everybody's bios. I am going to refer you to the sheet so we stay on time. But the panel will include Mr. Kobayashi, who is the leader of the oil group at the Institute of Energy Economics of Japan, David Mares, who is our scholar for Latin American energy studies and a professor of political science and an adjunct professor at the Graduate School of International Relations and Pacific Studies at UC San Diego. Dr. Stephen Lewis, who is our, oh God, Steve, I always forget the name of your endowment. Where is that? Is the acronym here, STAR, is the C.W. Starr Transnational China Fellow and faculty advisor for our summer internship program in DC, and he is a professor of the practice and associate director of our Child Center for Asian Studies. And then we have a special guest today. We've had a very interesting seminar with China's Institute of World Economic Studies at the China Institutes of Contemporary International Relations. The acronym is KICKR. And we are pleased to have Dr. Zhao, who is a research professor there, joining us today. Thank you very much.
I think I'm supposed to go first. And as Amy Jaffe was saying, I'm going to talk a little bit about why it's going to be very hard for China to move forward and try to centralize the energy decision-making in China. This is especially important because looking at the news, we can see that 2012 is a leadership transition year, just as it is in the United States. And it leads us to kind of question, given that the rise of China's economy, all of the resources they have at their disposal, the fact that they responded the same way that our government responded during the last economic crisis by putting more resources into the hands of certain actors, including local governments, and also centralizing in some way, it creates the question, is China moving towards planning again, or is it continuing the course towards markets? Is it continuing to decentralize and to privatize, or is it perhaps our central leaders more ambitious? Are they thinking that perhaps they can try to create a more centralized energy policy? So I'm going to talk also a little bit about what government and Communist Party organizational changes have occurred recently, and then also will the influence of state energy enterprises as primary energy policy decision makers continue at the central level as they have for the last several decades. I think it's worthwhile just to very briefly go over some of the targets of the 12th five-year plan, which was starting from this year and running through 2015. It's important because there's going to be a lot of discussion, especially over the next year or so, about the implementation of these, and they're fairly ambitious, and we have to wonder, given the ambitiousness of them, will they achieve them? And historically, we can definitely say that they tend to hit most of their targets. So certainly in the post-reform, 1978 reform era, they've been pretty good about hitting their targets. So the targets are economic growth annual 7% on average, 45 million new jobs supposedly, urban unemployment to be kept to around 5%. This is how they estimate it. Inflation to be kept to around 4%. Increasing domestic consumption, double GDP per capita by 2020 to 10,000 US dollars, and service sector value-added output to increase 4% to 47% of GDP. This is quite large. It's a very large restructuring of the economy. It is supposed to be included as part of this next five-year plan. Reforming monopoly industries to increase competition, encouraging enterprises to list on stock exchanges, increase urbanization from 4% to 51%, and the lifespan of one person is supposed to increase 1 year. This is how five-year plans work, right? 10% of all residents are to be listed as community volunteers. And however, it's not just ambitious things and vague targets. This is actually the first five-year plan to really address climate change. There's a lot of debate about it in the West and in America, but China, this is accepted. Yes, there is climate change and we need to do something about it. So we're going to reduce energy consumption per unit of GDP by 16%, reduce CO2 emission per unit of GDP by 17%, non-fossil fuel to account for 11.4% of total primary energy consumption, And then there's going to be priority investment in certain emerging strategic industries. And I've outlined and read the ones related to energy. New generation information technology, energy saving and environmental protection, new energy, biology, high-end equipment manufacturing, new materials, and new energy cars. This also varies by locality. This is the national 5-year plan. Each locality is supposed to come up with their own 5-year plan. They've given those and they've submitted them to the central government, and they're technically included within. But now, throughout the rest of this year and the beginning of next year, is when the actual details are actually worked out between center and locality, and then within each sector. And so different parts of the country have different priorities. Shanghai, for example, where I've been doing my research recently, is focusing on smart grids, and then also energy cars, new energy cars as well. The national, as I just mentioned, the energy sector plan will be rationalized and harmonized in the near future. The former director of the National Energy Administration, Zhang Guobao, has said that China will try to cap total energy use to 4 billion TCE. There is an ongoing debate over nuclear power, but very recently, at a conference I was just at in Qingdao from the Boao Forum, they said that shale and unconventional gas will be explored. And in fact, what they had originally proposed as part of the shale and unconventional gas part of the 5-year plan, they are rapidly changing. And a lot of that is actually starting with things like how much competition will we allow, and what rules and laws and regulations related to environmental issues and all of that we need to change. And so they're doing an enormous amount of research on those. It's also interesting, this 5-year plan is also getting at the question of credibility and the quality of information that's used in economic planning. And Premier Wen Jiabao has said we need a well-equipped statistical monitoring systems for greenhouse gas emissions, energy conservation, and emissions reductions will be created. And you may have heard recently that the American government, the American embassy in Beijing took him up on this. And the American embassy in Beijing has an air pollution monitor that has been reporting things different from the Beijing government's air pollution monitor. It's caused a lot of discussion, and the U.S. government received a lot of criticism. However, what's very interesting is that I talked to environmental officials in the central government, and many of them said they're actually in favor of this. And in talking with them, I also said, well, perhaps you can get the consulate of China in Houston to put in some air pollution monitors, and then we can all benefit from having more monitoring. And so we'll see if that actually happens. They've also discussed a 10,000 enterprise plan of energy efficiency. This is following the plan from 2006-2010, where they said, let's focus on the top enterprises, top 1,000 energy-consuming enterprises, and force them to sign new contracts to reduce their energy emissions. This is widely regarded as a success, but at this point we're still analyzing to see what that means and extending it to 10,000 enterprise plan. It's worth noting that 10,000 is in Chinese is kind of a metaphorical number. It means it could be 8,000, it could be 12,000. It's just 10,000 is probably, it sounds better in Chinese. The details of that will be worked out later. There's also going to be more development of energy service companies. I think a good example of this is following up on what Lawrence Berkeley Lab has been doing in Shanghai, creating energy service companies, people going door to door, informing people of how much you can save by introducing insulation and all of these things. And that's actually quite developed in cities like Shanghai. Wind, they're supposed to have 70 gigawatts of additional installation. Nuclear, 40 gigawatts of additional installation. And as you may have heard earlier this year, in response to what happened in Japan, the State Council announced the suspension and review of all new projects. But officials I've been talking to have said that we will be continuing forward once we assess what the proper risks are. High-speed rail, 35,000 kilometers of new tracks, are basically trying to connect every city greater than 500,000 population. That means over 100 cities. So China will be covered in this. Urban transportation, they're also giving the green light to continue developing subways and also regional transportation hubs. And if you're familiar with Shanghai and Chinese cities, in the past, what you might have known is that there's a big difference between what goes on at the district level, what goes on in the city municipal level, and then what goes on at the level of neighboring provinces. What seems to have happened very recently in just the last 2 years is the central government has given the green light to municipalities like Shanghai to say, you go ahead and develop, for example, the Hongqiao Airport on the western side of Shanghai, what was a domestic airport, and competing with the international airport in Pudong, in the eastern part of Shanghai. And Hongqiao, they said, go ahead and grow it and make it a hub for high-speed rail and also connection to subways, which means basically that it will be competing with Suzhou, Wuxi, Ningbo, all of these other cities in eastern China. And so they seem to be allowing some more freedom to municipalities to exploit their advantages and to effectively kind of potentially stunt the growth of neighboring localities. My report, and you read the details of it, and I'll just give you some of the highlights, is basically arguing that when it comes to national energy policy bodies, it's lao yangzi, nothing new in the near future. There is an underpowered National Energy Administration. Amy and I have been going to China for the last 11 years to meet with officials at the highest level to talk about everything from strategic petroleum reserves to going abroad strategies, to all of these things. And our friends at the Institute for International Economics in Japan have been doing this as well. And what we find is the same people again and again and again, because there are only a handful of people. There may be dozens now or hundreds, but they're still massively underpowered at the bureaucracy level, just in terms of manpower. They're also continuing, and I'll talk more in detail about this, about the way of developing energy policy is being led by small groups under the National Development Reform Council. There's a disproportionate relationship to national oil companies and energy companies in the Central Committee. I'll talk about that very briefly. And also disproportionate relationships to national oil companies within the Politburo itself. And so overall, there's a continued use of the nomenclatura system. Following the Soviet model, this is something where to be the head of a large state enterprise, or even the head of a large office or a field, an oil field or a refinery, for example, this is a high-ranking party position, which has to receive the approval of above. This system, as far as you know, is continuing. This is, of course, coming up for review in 2012 in terms of who are the people. And one thing we have to ask is, historically, over the last 10 years and 15 years in particular, the Communist Party of China has been poaching the leaders of the national oil companies in particular to place them in, to make them Politburo leaders and members of the Central Committee, the CPC-CC. And we have to wonder whether that will continue. And the overall question is Chinese government recentralizing and renationalizing? And there is a new energy authority. As Amy mentioned, there is a National Energy Commission. And a commission, this is very high ranking, right? It's higher than a ministry, sounds very authoritative. But I think if we compare it actually to what are the so-called leadership small groups or ad hoc informal groups in which most of the policy and decisions have been made over the last 20 or 30 years, and compare them in particular to ones called the Develop the West group, and also revitalize the Northeast and Old Industrial Areas group, and then also the Energy Leadership Small Group. If we look at how those, the leadership of the new National Energy Commission and compare it to that, I think what we'll find is something rather unique. First, if we look at the Develop the West Leadership Group, is a group of leaders that were tasked with getting around what the Central Committee and the Politburo and others were not able to achieve, and that was to try and marshal as much resources to develop Western China as possible, to keep it on par and growing with the rest of the country. And of the 27 people on this group, 21 of them have actually served in local levels, 7 in Western localities, about 1.3 localities each. Revitalize the Northeast was meant to revitalize China's Rust Belt. If you think of, Detroit and Pittsburgh and Cleveland and all of those in the American context, and put them all in the Northeast in China, Dalian, Shenyang, and Northeast, they have the same problem of revitalizing the Northeast. So they created another leadership small group to tackle this problem. 31 people on that one. 8 of them have served in the Northeast, and about 1.5 localities each. The Energy Leadership Small Group, which was in 2005, was developed to move forward on energy reforms. And 4 of the 16 people actually served in energy enterprises, coal, power, oil, and chemistry, of course, is related to the oil and gas companies. 13 of the 16 people actually served in localities with an average of 1.4 each. So what we see is when the Chinese government and the top leadership of the party want to make a significant change in policy, they create these small groups and they pick people who have extensive experience at the local level, and sometimes within the enterprises that will be tasked with putting this into operation. If we look at the new National Energy Commission, however, 23 people, it looks like a very, very impressive list. You've got ministers of foreign affairs, social security, worker safety, transport, water resources, security, commerce, finance, environmental protection, banking, science and technology, land and resources. 16 of the 23 are members of the Central Committee, and 2 of them are Politburos. It's led by the Premier, Wen Jiabao, and the man who's tipped to be the next Premier, Li Keqiang, is the assistant member. However, almost all of these are experienced on the demand side, not on the supply side, production of energy. None have experience working within a state energy enterprise, except for Wen Jiabao, the leader of it. Most of them are in finance and other central-owned industries. And only 14 of these 23 have actually worked in a local government. And so less than 1 each locality, as opposed to 1.5 to 2 or to 3. The average Politburo member, the top leaders of the Communist Party, have served in 2 to 3 localities each. And so if we look at the 16th Central Committee, 2002-2007, there were 23 people of the nearly 200 full members of the Central Committee who worked in energy-related enterprises, coal, power, petrochemicals, oil and gas. 5 of the 25 Politburo members had actually experience working within an energy enterprise. And this averaged 2.3 localities each. So to get to the top of the Communist Party, you've got to serve in a lot of localities, and it really helps to have served in a very powerful central-owned company, like a national oil company. These energy cadres represent much of the 1/3 of the so members of the Central Committee who come from state enterprises. So there's a disproportionately large amount of cadres within the Central Committee who come from the energy enterprises, specifically oil and gas. The 17th Central Committee, which is still going on and will end next year, has at least as many, with 9 of the 60 full members and 3 alternates having served in oil and gas alone. 6 of the 23 Politburo members have some ties to have worked within an actual energy enterprise. And you see 2.5 localities each. So in other words, to get to the top of the party, you've got to work your way up through the provinces. Sometimes you're sent down if you come from above, or sometimes you work your way up. And what it takes to get to the top of the Communist Party in China is often what it takes to get to the top of the national oil companies or the large central enterprises. The same skill set, the same connections. So one of the things we're wondering is which top party leaders with energy ties will continue forward into the 18th Central Committee and its Politburo. Generally speaking, China has been sticking to its idea that you retire when you're 65 or potentially 68. There are a few exceptions where it's 68. So going forward, it should be people born after 46 or definitely after 43. So retiring, we know that some very powerful people in the Politburo, for example, Zhou Yongkang, Liu Yandong, He Guoqiang, these are all people with extensive experience in the oil and gas industry. Li Yizhong, Tian Changping, Sun Xiaochun, these are all Central Committee members working in various areas who worked in Sinopec and CNPC. And they are all supposedly should be retiring. Then there's now the speculation is about another group of people. Su Shulin, for example, left Sinopec. He was the head of Sinopec, has been appointed head of Fujian province along the coast. He was born in 1962. Fu Changyu, a very well-known head of CNOC, is now the head of Sinopec. This is part of another trend, is moving people around between the different oil and gas companies as well. He's 1951. He could easily be retiring, but he could also go forward. Wang Zhigang, former vice president of Sinopec, is now a member of the Central Committee. Wei Liucheng is a little bit older, but he's now a leader in Hainan Congress. He could also go forward. Yang Chuantang, former head of the Qilu and Shengli fields and refineries. Wang Yilin, not a member of the Central Committee, but now he's the party head of CNOC, and so he very likely could be moving forward into the next. Jiang Zemin was rumored this year to be moving out of CNPC, where he's chairman, and potentially moving to Yunnan province and moving to leadership, but he was not. And people I talked to are saying that it's probably because of the oil spills in Dalian. And so you can, to rise to the top of a national oil company is a good way to rise up into the party and government, but you have to succeed and not be associated with any spectacular disasters, such as we had in the Dalian oil spills in the Northeast in the last year or so. Wang Yupu, the head of China's largest oil field, Daqing, is an alternate in the 17th Central Committee. He could very easily go forward become a full member. Zhou Jiping is a very interesting case. He is the new president of CNPC. He's the former head of China National Overseas, so he's the one responsible for CNPC going abroad, basically, and overseeing the management of most of those. It'll be very interesting to see if he is made a member of the Central Committee. Liu Tiannan is a name you'll hear about a lot in the newspapers. He's the new head of the National Energy Administration, and it might make sense to make him a member of the Central Committee, but now he's not. If he is, I think that would be a good sign, a very clear sign that the central government really is putting, the central party leadership really is putting some serious weight and heft into the central government agencies. So my analysis basically concludes that unless there are new former heads of state energy companies who are now Central Committee members are bumped up to the Politburo to replace the retiring ones, then the potential influence of the state energy enterprises could be diminished. They have to replenish them. And unless the new heads of the energy state-owned enterprises, in particular the oil companies, CNOOC, CNPC, Sinopec, unless they are bumped up to the Central Committee, then the state-owned enterprise influence will also be diminished. And then finally, unless the National Energy Commission gets cadres with significant state-owned enterprise experience, it will likely remain weak, and Chinese energy policy will remain in hands of both local governments and then also the energy enterprises, including the NOCs. So, thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here to talk about China and energy security. Especially this morning, I feel very happy because mostly you focus on the marketing issues, commercial issues. There are not so many people talking about China's rights, energy competition, this kind of security issues. Because energy security is a very big topic, very hot topic. Also, there are so many misperceptions with this concept. Generally say, in China, mostly when we talk about energy security, mostly Chinese will focus on the first part, energy. We are concerned about the supply of energy. But a number of the analyses from the United States and Europe, they focus on the second part, security. They concern about the implication of China's energy policy and China's energy behavior. And also there are so many debates inside China and outside China. Even inside China, does China have our energy security policy or not? There's so many diversified opinions. Some scholars say China has energy security policy, but some said we don't have that. Anyway, I'm asked to talk about China's energy security policy, so I just share some of my personal views. We have been talked a lot about China's energy issues, challenges, China's policies. What's the challenge China faces today? In my view, that first is the energy demand increased dramatically in past 20 years. In 2000, China's consumption is about 1 billion coal equivalent. Then 2005, about 2 billion. Then 2010, 3 billion. Why there are so many dramatic growth of the energy demand? There are so many reasons. The GDP growing very fast, and also our consumption structure changed. There are so many middle class. The middle class is rising. Then they consume a lot of their electricity equipment, something like the refrigerator, TV, or these kind of things. And also our economy structure is very much highly industrialized. So we have so many new railroad, high-speed way, these kind of things. Also our urbanization, now the rate, the people living in the cities, about 49%. is also growing very fast. Second challenge is the environmental issues, the pollution. It has already been mentioned this morning. The CO2 and SO2 emission, China's this kind of the emission now is #1 in the world. According to the World Bank, now about 20 most polluted cities in the world, 16 in China. We also have so many problems with the energy mix or energy structure. Mostly we consume the coal. In 1990, the coal accounts about 75% in our energy consumption. By 2000, it decreased to 65%. But in 2010, it went back to 70%. And also our energy efficiency is much lower than the European and United States, also Japan. We have a lot of problems with our energy efficiency, especially also the market. We are just under the transition from the planned economy or to a market economy. And this morning, someone say command economy, whatever. So there are so many things changed. And also we are facing a lot of the international challenge regarding the energy issues. There are so many criticised from the outside world, something like the China energy rights, energy competition or resource competition, or geological expansion or whatever. Facing this kind of the challenge, what China have done. Generally speaking, I think mostly China is more and more focused on the energy demand side management, paying more attention to the energy saving, encouraging the diversification of the energy mix or energy structure or energy import source. Also encouraging or speeding the energy market reformation. The energy saving and energy efficiency improvement, we have done a lot. There are so many this kind of the information. I don't want to waste more time. In past 10 years, China has already invested about 1 trillion RMB in environmental protection. And energy saving has already been one important policy for China. And in our 11 5-year plan, the target to reduce the energy intensity per GDP is about 20%. This target is almost achieved. And also in 2009, Chinese government had another target for emission reduction. By 2020, per GDP carbon emission will be decreased by about 40 to 55% on the base of 2005. We also have a number of the energy saving or energy or carbon emission measures. Something like the control of the energy consumption. I mean, decrease the growth rate of the energy consumption. We have some certain amount of the consumption for the whole country or for some provinces. And in Shanghai and Beijing, this kind of big cities, to limit their vehicles. I would shut down some kind of the small or inefficient or heavy polluted mine or the factories have the new fuel standard. Someone say China's fuel standard or gasoline standard is the highest or is the best in developing world. Someone say even higher than United States. Then the market reformation or liberalization is another very important measure for China now has been doing. There are so many problems with our energy market. Something like the price control or the subsidies. Anyway, China's energy market is liberalizing, is under transition. In 2009, China started to levy their gasoline tax. I think in the future, this kind of tax will be increased a lot. And also, we are trying to have their resource tax, try to reform their energy pricing system, and allow more private companies to get into the energy market. And regarding the clean energy development, we have a quite ambitious goal. National goal about renewables is by 2020 about 16%, and anyway, it includes the hydro. In 2009, China's investment in clean energy overtook United States as the #1 in the world. And in 2000, the Chinese government have some kind of their policy on the new and strategy industry. In their 5-year plan will be focused on their new energy, new energy cars, and this kind of their industry. So now the PV in the production in China is #1 in the world. This kind of the increase quite dramatically in past 5 years. Also, our solar heating, hot solar heater, their production and consumption accounts half of the world. The wind power, the capacity of wind power increased from 500,000 kW in 2005 to 40 GW in 2010. It's supposed to be 150 GW in by 2020. And the nuclear, under the scale of under construction of China's nuclear plants accounts around 40% of the world. Here follows some points of the 12th Energy 5-year plan. It's focused on some of the following points. First, to continue to address the energy conservation and demand side management, decrease the carbon emission density by 35% in 2050 compared with 2005. Push forward the clean use of fossils and strengthen clean energy development. The non-fossil fuels to 11.4% by 2015. Then to improve energy distribution network, building more and more pipelines, electricity transmission ports and docks, this kind of the infrastructure. And support new energy technology as well as new energy vehicles development. And also to improve the energy and resource pricing reform. The last one is the international cooperation. there are so many explanations on China's energy policy. Also, there are so many misperceptions on China's energy security policy. Probably the number one misperception on China's energy policy, in my view, is that a number of analyses think that overseas investment is some kind of the China's energy security policy. Someone say China is global searching energy. There are so many this kind of the debate or saying. Also, inside China, some analysts think the equity is very much related to our energy security. I think this kind of the misperception is well spread. It's very popular inside China or outside China. Actually, China's overseas investment on petroleum was earlier than China becoming the net importer. Also, this issue is very complicated because most of the companies are state companies, and mostly China's overseas investment is focused on resource. And this is some kind of the indicator, some kind of reflection of China's domestic domestic economy structure. Domestically, most of the big companies are state-owned, and most of them is focused on the resource sector. And second misperception is some kind of the Malacca dilemma or Pearl strategy. There are so many Chinese talking about Malacca dilemma, and there are so many foreign analysis talking about the Pearl strategy, especially the United States and also some Indian other foreign scholars. And also people talk a lot of pipelines. The pipelines from a lot of the countries, Central Asia, Russia, some proposed pipelines from Pakistan or Myanmar. My view is that the Malacca dilemma is overstated in China. It's overstated, I think, outside China. The maritime security or energy transportation is not a big deal. It's much safer, transportation by sea than the pipeline. Pipeline is more fragile. Another pipeline from Central Asia, also from Myanmar, mostly for the domestic market, driven by local provinces, by the companies, rather than for their energy security, because the amount of the energy from Myanmar pipeline, also from Central Asia, is quite limited. It doesn't have much for our energy security. Another misperception is on clean energy, because our clean energy development has been very fast in past several years, and also we have a lot of problems with the pollution and energy structure. So there are quite different sayings in United States. Someone say China now is the leader of clean energy development. Someone say China is some kind of a lagger regarding the environment protection or energy efficiency. I think to some part, something like PV production, this kind of part, China is some kind of a leader. For the energy efficiency, maybe China needs to improve a lot. Generally speaking, that's regarding the clean energy, China now is some kind of mix. It's not a leader, it's also not a lagger. And also Chinese have a lot of the misperception on the West, on the United States. Something like the 走出去, going abroad. Still, there are a number of the people, a number of the scholars think overseas investment is important for our energy security. And also something like the war, United States war on Iraq, is for oil. I think this is popular in China, also in other countries. And something like the American intentionally to contain China with something don't like China to get enough oil or something. This is also exists in some scholars' mind. So there's so many misperceptions, there are big perception gap to deep this kind of cooperation between China and the United States. I think we need to know more each other. From China side, I think we need to improve their energy market reformation. So many people talk about their clean energy. There's also one saying that China's clean energy development is some kind of the green great leap forward. There are so many problems with our clean energy development, especially the over investment. And something like their measures to control their carbon emission, to decrease their pollution, something like shutting down their factories, to control their cars, the numbers. Maybe their intention, the will is good, but probably their measures is not so market-oriented. And also we need to cooperate more with their international societies. Talking about the cooperation, I think we have another perception gap. When talking about cooperation, mostly Chinese focus on their bilateral cooperation, but American, probably Europe, focus more on multilateral cooperation. Okay. Regarding the Sino-US cooperation, I like one term mentioned by Kissinger, Dr. Kissinger, co-evolution. China should plan more, and probably their world should study Chinese more. Okay, thank you.
I've been asked to talk about China's investment in Latin American energy resources, and think about that in a couple of ways, comparing China with two other Asian new investors in Latin American energy, South Korea and India. And then just to give you a comparative focus, and then look at some of the implications of those Chinese investments, both for China and for Latin American governments and societies. Here we go. All right, so the structure of the study, which you have or can get online. The first part, we look at the geopolitics of China's energy strategy compared with that of South Korea and India. Everybody's talked about China's strategy already, so I won't go into that. And since time is short, if you want to know about South Korea and India, it doesn't look all that different from China in terms of the desires. Certainly on the policy-making side, it looks different, but you can pick that up there. I'll spend more time talking about Asian investments in specific Latin American countries, comparing the three Asian countries, and then I'll look at the view from Latin America, implications for governments and policies. There's a lot of discussion about China in Latin America, energy. There's a discussion in Latin America, there's a discussion in the United States. One thing to keep in mind is perspective. China is in Latin American energy resources, but it's not the main place. Here you can see where China is getting its oil imports, 2010, and you can see that South and Central America as a region are the region that is providing the least amount of oil to China. Okay, now that could change over time. It's not that far from Asia Pacific or Europe Eurasia, but nevertheless, the the thing to keep in mind is that China is much more invested elsewhere than it is in South and Central America. I don't have Mexico in there because Mexico doesn't, as you all know, Mexico doesn't allow foreign investment in exploration and production. So, the main destinations for Asian investment in oil and gas, for China, Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina, Ecuador. For South Korea, Peru, Colombia. South Korea started to get involved in Brazil, and then last year pulled out of Brazil, saying that they wanted to put their investments in a safer environment, including Colombia. And given what Chevron is just experiencing in Peru, maybe the South Koreans were a little prescient in that decision. There is some discussion in South Korea about whether they should get into Venezuelan gas. The thing to understand about Venezuela is not only is it now certified as having more oil than Saudi Arabia, but it has a ton of gas too. Conventional gas. Most of it associated, but lots of it still non-associated. So the South Koreans are interested in that, but at least as far as I've seen, have not yet made a commitment. And they haven't been interested in Venezuelan oil. India is in Brazil and Colombia. If you look at these three distinctions here, and you looked at South America, you would think the most risky investments from a political perspective, from a political economy perspective, would be Venezuela, Ecuador, and Argentina. And you'll notice it's the Chinese who are in there. It's not the others. So one way to understand that is to look both at what are the resources that the companies from these three different countries can bring to bear, and what are their risks associated with those resources. And another way to think about that is how, in fact, do the governments and investors from these three countries think about the political risks associated with investing in the energy and in the energy sector here. As I said, I won't say a lot about South Korea and India on that because we're talking about China and time is short. But let's see. When we think about China and its relationship with Latin America, the Chinese, not just about Latin America, but this is the way in which Chinese have written about and talked about going abroad, is that you have to go beyond commercial and contractual relationships. Those are good, but they're not sufficient. You have to build friendships, and the way to build friendships is to build win-win relationships. That win-win relationship will guarantee that when those market conditions don't look so great, you're still there. Right? Those win-win relationships, those friendships will guarantee that when push comes to shove, they'll treat you differently. And last year I was in Beijing and I gave 3 invited talks at the National Development Bank, and we talked about Venezuela, and I talked about debt, the politics of debt. And populism in Latin America, where Argentina walked away from its debt, where Bolivia and Ecuador have said that these debts were contracted by governments that we don't agree with. They're the old governments. We're the new revolutionary governments, and we don't have to pay those kinds of debts. And it was really interesting to see that the people in the National Development Bank had not only did they have no idea that this had occurred, they had no idea about how to think about this. Their question was, is Chavez going to be around? Then I went to Kicker, and I gave a talk on the politics of populism. And you know, I don't know if they don't want to give me any information that they have, right? But again, at Kicker, the question over and over again, the question I would get is, well, is Chavez going to hang around? They were very serious. They're good scholars, but the way in which they're looking at the question is very focused on either a personality, okay, or on what they think is a very good relationship with this country, and therefore, since it's win-win, hey, we're giving you lots of money on loans, we're buying all this oil and gas from you, so we must be good friends. Part of it is that China doesn't want to get involved in domestic politics. As I'll say in a minute, that's what makes it interesting to a number of Latin American governments. The Chinese don't want to get involved in domestic politics. But not wanting to get involved in domestic politics shouldn't mean not understanding domestic politics. And I think the Chinese haven't quite made that transition yet. So I divide the countries in South America where the Chinese are heavily involved into two kinds of relationships. There's the unconditional friend relationship, which is what the Chinese would like to develop. And then there's the business partner and competitor relationship, where yes, we Latin American governments, we need your money, we need your loans, we'd like to have you here just like we have everybody else here, and we're going to treat you just like everybody else, okay, which is not quite the way in which the Chinese have seen it. Now, what does it mean to be treated like everybody else? It means that you're subject to, and I put quotes, normal there, because we're talking about normal within the context of Latin American politics, not normal within the context of Canadian politics, all right? So subject to the normal way of doing business. What's the normal way of doing business? Is periodic forced contract renegotiations, okay? Outright exclusion from specific areas, seizure of assets. Does that happen all the time? No, it doesn't happen all the time. Doesn't happen all the time. Does it happen at the same time in particular governments, in particular countries? No, it doesn't. But part of doing the political risk analysis is understanding the vulnerabilities in the different kinds of environments. And this is what, from my perspective, the Chinese have not done, and which makes them a bit vulnerable. If we want to think about those unconditional friends and business partners and rivals, one way to think about it is to think from the Latin American side, what really matters are two things, and I've put them on the two axes here. The vertical axis is the role of natural resources and national development strategy. What the Chinese are interested in is basically two things: natural resources, so that they can take them back to China or put them in the world market, okay, or infrastructure development, because infrastructure development allows Chinese companies to be used. Okay, they're not interested in developing the manufacturing sector in Latin America. They're not interested in developing a service sector in Latin America. Now, some countries in Latin America aren't interested in that either. Venezuela is one of them. Okay, Venezuela is under Chavez, Venezuela is very happy to develop its natural resources, oil, mining, okay, and Chavez has now said that they're going to look seriously at gas. Okay, so on that horizontal axis, up high, natural resources dominates your national development strategy. Low on that axis, let's see if we can do this here. Low on this axis, so down here, means that, yeah, now you've got natural resources, but you really want to develop a modern industrial service economy, and you want your relationships to contribute to that. All right? If we look at Venezuela, Ecuador, and Peru, they're heavily natural resource development strategy dependent. Okay? Colombia, not as much, but still high. But then down here, Argentina and Brazil have fabulous natural resources, agriculture and mining, okay, including oil and gas. But that's not where they see the future of their country. They see that as a mechanism to develop an industrial and service sector, a technological economy. So these are means, not ends for them. So they fall a little lower on that scale there. And then over here, what we have on this axis, the horizontal axis, is the government's dependence on non-transparent sources of revenue. Let me unpack that for you for a minute and show you why that's important. Right? If a government contracts money, whether it's out of taxes or out of loans, and it has to be transparent in what it's doing with that money, the citizens know what it's doing with that money. Okay? And in that kind of an environment, it's very difficult for the government to use that money for corruption, to use that money for buying off elections, et cetera, et cetera. All right? So if the government is getting money that's transparent, okay, the government itself knows that it has to invest that money in ways that produce public goods, in ways that generate growth down the road. Okay? If the government is getting money and it doesn't have to say anything about where that money is going, okay, then the government can use that money to pay off its supporters, use it to move against the opposition, use it for clientelism, etc., etc. All right? Now, to the degree that you want non-transparent sources of money, okay, Chinese development loan packages are wonderful, okay? Because, again, China doesn't want to get involved in domestic politics. So China can lend you $10 billion, $20 billion, it's over $40 billion now to Chavez for, quotes, development projects. And that's great for Chavez because Chavez can use it, right? And Chavez does use it. And he uses it in a variety of ways. Some of those ways are useful. Some of those ways are ways that actually allow Chavez to pay off generals, pay off other people, to supply his militia, to use government resources during election campaigns, etc., etc. So if you're out on that end there, okay, over here, you're dependent on non-transparent sources of revenue, the Chinese look great. So if you take this and you roll in natural resources, you're up here high and you're out here, you're going to be over here, and it turns out Venezuela has a wonderful relationship with China. Okay, I've been looking at the literature for a couple of years now. I have graduate students looking at the literature. I just don't find Chavez ever saying anything to the Chinese the way that the Menims say in Argentina. They've got a good relationship, but it's a partnership. And look, as a partnership, we expect you to buy more from us, not just soybeans. We expect you to invest not just in the National Railroad, but to invest in developing the technological capability of our people in Argentina. Lula in Brazil says, we want to change the trade relationship with China. We're not going to export simply raw materials. I think if you look at it this way, you get a better sense of why different Latin American countries have different kinds of relationships with China. And I think China hasn't quite figured it out yet. Implications for Latin American politics, Chinese packaging, that should be packaging, of loans and investments increases the sustainability of inefficient development policies. And then the question becomes, well, how long can those policies go on? Whether it's not just the case of Venezuela, it could be the case of Ecuador. If the Chinese are providing money that nobody else would provide because everybody else sees the purpose of these monies in terms of development projects as not sustainable, it does allow Correa to continue to push that policy, but for how long? Okay. And then the lack of transparency in the Chinese package facilitates the corruption and clientelism that sustains Latin American authoritarian efforts to undermine democracy. I'll buy the argument, just for argument's sake, that every country in Latin America is still a democracy, all right? But they vary on the democratic character. And it's very clear that Bolivia, Venezuela, and Ecuador, the governments have systematically undertaken to limit the space for the press, for the freedom of the press, for the opposition, etc., etc. And the money that they generate through their exports and through the loan packages they get helps them do that. To wrap up then, conclusions. 3 new Asian players have invested in 10 countries in the area, but those investments are basically concentrated. 6 countries get most of the investment, and those vary by the country we're looking at. The South Koreans are very cautious in investing. India, South Korea, and China have all talked about putting together packages, doing oil for debt swaps, sovereign loans, etc. Clearly, South Koreans and Indians don't have the kind of liquidity that China has, but they're also much more careful about putting packages together. They tend to invest in different countries because risk is a factor. It's not the only thing. I haven't done an econometric analysis of each of the individual investments, so I can tell you, what the relative weights are. But clearly, risk is a factor there. Chinese NOCs are more likely to accept investment terms that include expensive resource rents and other constraints imposed by resource nationalism. South Korean and Indian approach is more commercially oriented, reducing the risks in the more stridently nationalistic investment environments in Latin America. Chinese have an advantage right now to play in this environment. If you want to play in this environment, the Chinese have the advantage. The Chinese firms are better able to pay higher rates for energy assets because their access to preferential finance is stronger than the other Asians. Okay. The Chinese firms raise more capital via corporate bonds. Now, that's partly because the Chinese firms are stronger firms, but they're able to generate some of that capital. And when some of these investments begin to look so more problematic, the Chinese firms themselves will suffer from it. The Chinese government is willing and able to package deals, including loans and development financing, to secure access for Chinese oil and gas investors. South Korean and Indian governments, even though they've said that they would like to move in this direction, have not been able to mobilize these assets to the same degree. And going back to that risk point, they are more risk averse, and so you don't see them as active in the riskier places in Latin America. Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude towards the Baker Institute for giving me this great opportunity to make a presentation, to be with distinguished panelists today. I really enjoyed all the presentation today, and the topic I'm going to talk about is China's low carbon strategies. And to some extent, my presentation overlaps previous presentations, so you can regard this kind of recap from a low carbon perspective of today's discussion. First, I'd like to point out several factors that drives China for low carbon action these days. The first one is, of course, its runaway energy demand growth. As repeatedly pointed out in this discussion, China's energy demand will grow significantly in the future by almost 1.8 times towards 2030. And so is its import dependence on fossil fuel. So China is pursuing its low carbon strategy not only for a climate change perspective, but also its energy security perspective to reduce the import dependence of fossil fuel. That is one driving factor behind China's low carbon action. And the second is, of course, pollution. As you see in the slide, China has severe acid rain problems in the southern part of its land, and severe water pollution in the northern part of its land. And part of its reasons is its intensive use of coal. So how to reduce coal consumption and have more greener energy is a big issue for China to reduce pollutions. So China's low carbon action is pursued from a public health policy perspective. That is the second dimension of Chinese low carbon action. The third one is green growth from an industrial policy perspective. In the economic rescue package right after the Lehman shock, some 210 billion renminbi was spent for the environmental sector as an economic stimulus package. And also, as Dr. Rui's presentation mentioned, Chinese government set the target of so-called emerging industry, which includes nuclear and renewables. And it's share to be raised to 8% of GDP by 2015 and 15% of GDP by 2020. And also, actually, a large amount of investments being made in the renewable energy sector in China these days. According to the statistics of Bloomberg, 49 billion US dollars was invested in Chinese renewable industry. And this is the largest amount in the world. And also, these days, a number of urban infrastructure development projects are being pursued in various areas in China. Many of these projects are being undertaken under the name of eco-city or smart community. Some project is not really eco-city or smart community, it's just labeled as such. But the project in Tianjin, it's in the northeastern part of China. This is really an eco-city and a smart community which uses advanced technology from Japan and Europe to be very efficient in its energy consumption. So this kind of urban infrastructure development are also being pursued in the name of low carbon or green policy in China. So China's low carbon strategy is being pursued from industrial policy perspective as well. And I'd like to a little bit talk about what China is doing in low carbon actions. I think there are 5 pillars in this effort. The first one is international pledge to reduce carbon emissions. China has already committed to reduce its carbon emission per GDP by 40 to 45% by 2020. This is international commitment. China will not pay any penalty if they could not meet this target, but this is about its international credibility. So as far as I understand, China is very serious to achieve this target. And the second one is international cooperation. China is quite active in forming a partnership and bilateral relationship in its low-carbon action with Japan, US, and European countries. They are very eager to learn the best practice from abroad. The third one is development of legal framework and target control system. Until the year 2006, China did not have any notable regulation or policy in the low carbon issues. But after 2006, they provided the Renewable Energy Act, and since then they have developed a lot of laws and plans and guidelines and targets rapidly. And the fourth and fifth pillars is energy conservation and alternative energy development, which I will talk about a little more in detail in later slides. This slide overlaps the Dr. Lewis' presentation, so I wouldn't go into detail. But one thing I'd like to mention in this slide is that in the last 5-year plan, they only had a target of the energy conservation per GDP. But for this current 5-year plan, they added 2 extra targets, as shown in the slide, non-fossil fuel target and the carbon emissions target. So they expand the scope of the low carbon action in this current 5-year plan, which shows the seriousness of the Chinese government in this area. And as discussed in the previous slides, their energy conservation per GDP and the carbon emission GDP continue to decline in the last 5-6 years, and their target seems very realistic. So I think China will achieve this target properly in the next 5 years. They also imposed the energy conservation target for each province to ensure it is surely be achieved. Some regions with high economic development, like Guangdong and Shanghai, has a higher target of 18%. But rural areas like Tibet and Xinjiang has lower target at 10%. Energy pricing reform should be implemented in terms of energy efficiency improvement. That historical experience in developed countries shows that pricing reform will be inevitable to achieve the energy efficiency improvement. But in this regard, Chinese government is quite cautious because of the inflation concern and some other political backlash from the people. For renewable energy, the installed capacity of wind and solar has increased quite significantly in the last 5 years. And China has introduced feed-in tariff system in 2009 for onshore wind power, and they're going to introduce it for solar by the end of this year. So that will provide another momentum for the installment growth. And although it is not finalized yet, China has some target of renewable energy capacity, as shown in the right-hand table. They plan to expand the renewable energy capacity quite significantly in the next 5 years. And nuclear. China is currently the 10th largest nuclear power producer in the world in terms of its generation capacity. But as I showed it in right-hand table, they have lots of capacity expansion plans. And if all these capacity plans are realized, they're going to be the number 2 nuclear power producer, only after the United States. So they are very aggressive. And as repeatedly pointed out in the previous discussions, as far as I understand, China does not have changed its active installment policy for the nuclear power plants. And I mentioned renewable and nuclear, but it's what is most regarded as the realistic and effective approach or means to achieve low carbon is natural gas. And indeed, recently, Chinese government has paid growing attention to having more natural gas in its energy mix. And in fact, natural gas demand outlook by major institutions like IEA has been revised continuously upward. IEA forecasted its natural gas demand in 2030 will be 157 BCM in its 2004 World Energy Outlook. But in its latest World Energy Outlook, they forecast the demand will be 435 BCM. It's almost tripled in the last 7 years. This is partly because Chinese government paid more attention to the natural gas introduction to its energy mix. And the Chinese natural gas demand is largely determined by infrastructure development, such as pipeline and LNG regasification capacity, and pricing policy. So it's largely determined by the government policy. So as long as government pays a lot of attention to natural gas, I'm sure the natural gas demand in China will continue to grow quite rapidly. So the next question is from where China will have procure natural gas. They have already introduced LNG and going to import some 40 or 65 BCM from Central Asia. But Russia has to be the next big supply source for China. At this moment, China seems not very enthusiastic to import Russian natural gas. But in the long term, especially after the 2015 or 2020, it is highly expected that Russian natural gas, particularly Eastern Siberian gas, to be exported to China. And that will certainly ease the China's energy security and carbon emission concerns, and also it can contribute to the market balance of Asia's natural gas market. China is also quite active to diversify the transportation fuel by having more electricity vehicle, plug-in hybrid, and some groups in national oil companies are seriously studying about natural gas vehicle these days. But this is kind of a caveat in China's low carbon actions. Coal-fired power generation will continue to be the largest power source in the future, as shown in the slide. And coal intensity, coal consumption per GDP will be significantly reduced in the future, but it's still among the highest level in the world. I'd like to mention some challenges ahead. And the first one is also overlapped with Dr. Liu's presentation. It's management of various policies. Various institutions, ministries are involved in low carbon efforts in China. And now the scope of low carbon policy expands. How to manage, how to integrate this existing number of regulations and laws will be a key issue to more effectively ensure the carbon emission reduction. And also, this is related to this morning's presentation. China's industrial structure largely depends on the manufacturing industry, and its economic growth is largely dependent on investment. Unless this structure is not reformed, its drastic carbon emissions reduction will be difficult. So I'd like to summarize my presentation. The first one is China's low carbon efforts are pursued from energy security, public health, and industrial policy perspectives. And the second one is energy conservation and gasification, regarded as the two major and most effective items for Chinese low carbon actions. And finally, reform of economic and industrial structure, and also effective policy management will be needed for the drastic and sustainable carbon emission reduction. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, do we have a few questions for the panel?
So, Dr. Liu, if I understand you correctly, one of your conclusions is that the national policy regarding the energy sector will be similar or 老样子 as a history. So what do you think is the implication to all these major IOCs play in China? Do you think there will be less barriers for them to entry or still the same?
I have to say I think that there's a long history of welcoming international players for things like technology, sometimes for capital, but also sometimes to increase the competition amongst the national oil companies, for example, or Chinese companies. Sometimes the central government is happy to play the IOCs and MNSCs off against the Chinese oil and gas companies. And I think actually the real test case will be, looking forward, will be shale gas. And unconventional gas, because we all know that one of the reasons it developed so quickly, I think in the United States and Texas in particular, is the fact that you did have a residual, energy infrastructure which could be, utilized more efficiently if you actually had some competition, and allowing people in, small gas companies, for example, to have access to the networks. And in China's case, of course, you don't really have that. You don't have a history of it. So all of the discussions we've been having in China recently at conferences and discussions with Chinese leaders about shale gas have all been built around the concept of, yes, it could move forward if we could manage to get CNPC and Sinopec and all these other companies to actually allow some type of competition in it. And yet I didn't hear very much sounds of cooperation or interest from those, and in fact more kind of outright hostility, particularly from CNOOC. But that's not terribly surprising, given that they would not benefit very much at all from shale gas in China. So I have to say that overall I don't think it is. There doesn't seem to be increased potential.
When you were saying a maritime transit of oil through the Strait of Malacca was not as much of a concern, did you mean even in the event of a war with the U.S.? Did you mean in that scenario as well, or are you just talking about peacetime?
I'm talking about my opinion of the Malacca dilemma in China.
But I just mean even in the event of, let's say, a conflict between the U.S. and China, let's say over Taiwan, would you still say that? I'm just wanted to clarify: was the Strait of Malacca still a safer mode of transit, did you think, than the pipeline? And if so, why? Okay.
Malacca dilemma is popular in China, but personally, I think it's not a big deal. Even you are concerned about the wartime. In wartime, it's not the problem of energy security. It's the security, it's the war. In wartime, even you have a lot of the measures to safeguard the energy security. In peacetime, this kind of the measures doesn't work in wartime. In wartime, our consumption will be dramatically decreased. And our energy, no matter the coal, the oil or gas, personally I think, is enough for wartime use. Even you have a lot of the equity or investment overseas in wartime, you couldn't get it back. And also, if you concern the wartime, the pipeline is more fragile. If you assume that the United States can have a war with China, it's quite easier for the United States to cut off the pipeline from wherever. So personally, I think the sea line is more safer than the pipeline. That's personal view.
Okay, thank you very much. Here you go.
I have a question for Mr. Kobayashi. You had said 2 items were going to lead to the smaller carbon footprint of China. One was energy conservation, the second gasification. How will gasification improve the footprint? Will there be sequestration of the CO2, or what will happen?
What I mean is, particularly in the industrial sector and to some extent in the power sector, natural gas can replace the coal. Replacement of coal with natural gas means lower carbon. So that's why I said gasification will be a lower carbon footprint or carbon emission reduction. That's my point.
Natural gas power instead of coal power plants.
Yes, and also, now China's total energy demand is increasing. So having more natural gas in the energy mix itself will contribute to the lower carbon compared to the smaller percentage of natural gas. Otherwise, that incremental demand will be supplied from coal or oil. So having more natural gas itself will mean the lower carbon compared to the business as usual case.
This is a little bit of a follow-up to this question. Since coal is such a big component still, is there much work on carbon sequestration to be applied to coal?
Yes, China is now seriously working on the CCS potential. But as far as I know, the location of coal-fired power plants and the places for ideal for carbon sequestration, typically depleted the natural gas field, is a little bit far geographically. So they're seriously working on the CCS project, but actual implementation of CCS will be very limited in the near future.